that presenting numbers should be viewed as a communication skill.
So Randall, you recently wrote a book called Painting with Numbers, presenting financials and other numbers so people will understand you. Why did you choose the name and what does it mean?
It's a great question, Celeste, and it's central to what I'm trying to say. My basic premise is that just like painting, being a skilled communicator is both a craft and an art. And now by communicating, we usually think of writing an important position paper or a business memo, or speaking, standing up and speaking to a group of people. But my main point with painting with numbers is that presenting numbers is just as much a communication skill as writing and speaking ordinary words. And that's especially critical for people like finance professionals in FP&A or in accounting, engineers, people in the social sciences, for whom often the information that's most important that they're presenting is numbers. So that's the first part of the title. The second part of the title is the so people will understand you. And again, this is something that people who deal with numbers for a living often fail to remember, is that getting the numbers right, which is an important mathematical skill, that getting the numbers right is only 10% of the job. The other 90% of the job is getting your audience to understand what it is that you're trying to say.
And so, Randall, what are some examples that people need to choose in order to when they present financials?
Well, let's start with a simple example, and I'll show you two reports. They're labeled A and B, and what you'll notice about them is that they're exactly the same information. And I often ask people, which version do they prefer? And virtually 100% of the audience prefers version B to version A. Now, the question to ask yourself is, and it may seem obvious, but it isn't as obvious when you think about the work involved for getting an FP&A professional to present really clear, attractive, effective, powerful information. But ask yourself, how did you get from version A to this nice-looking version B? But the next example I want to show you is radically different ways of presenting exactly the same information. And for this example, let's take a look at three different reports, and they all say the Gutenberg Printing Company at the top. And what I want you to notice is that all three of these reports, they all three show exactly the same information. Version B and version C were generated solely from the information that you see in version A of the report. And frankly, I would argue they're all very good examples of numbers presentation. And this is a price list. This is the kind of thing that an FP&A professional might be expected to deliver, for example, for his or her sales organization. They're all good examples, but they serve different purposes. Version A is useful for an individual customer, for one individual customer who has a good idea of what he or she wants to have printed, what the size of the image is, how many copies they want to have printed, and they just want to get a price quote for that particular job. Version B is a lot different. You can't necessarily get from version B, you can't necessarily get the exact price of a specific job, but you do get a sense over a very wide range of numbers of copies for two different standard print sizes, at least standard in the United States, 3 by 5 inches and 6 inches by 9 inches, what the range of pricing is for that job. And the third example doesn't give you much specificity at all, and this is one of the characteristics of graphs, but it does give you an overall visual impression of what Gutenberg's approach to pricing is. And you can even visually see that there are a couple of anomalies in the pricing structure the Gutenberg company might want to change. Anyway, so the point here is there are many examples of how small changes in the way numbers are presented can have a very important difference in how those numbers are understood. And FP&A professionals are presenting that kind of information all the time, and they need to think about it constantly.
Well, Randall, you've left us with a lot to take home today. So what are the main thoughts, key points that you'd like the audience to walk away with today?
Well, first of all, Celeste, thanks for having me. I think my subject is critically important to FP&A professionals. But the main takeaway is that presenting numbers should be viewed as a communication skill. And as a communication skill, in order to communicate effectively, whether you're writing, speaking, or presenting numbers, first, you need to know the rules and the grammar of the presentation craft. Second, you have to have a sense of narrative flow. That is, you need to remember that you're telling a story. Even if you're just being descriptive, you're telling a story. And lastly, you need to demonstrate respect and compassion for your audience as you're presenting information to them. It's also important to remember that when you communicate, you're constantly sending out messages to your audience about yourself, about your intelligence, about your grasp of the subject matter, about your work ethic, about your honesty and your integrity, about your respect for the people you're presenting information to. It's important to think about the information you're presenting. Also, if you're a manager, it's important to remember that how your staff communicates is a direct reflection on you as their manager. And lastly, I would strongly encourage you, just as with writing and speaking, to develop a consistent style for the way you present numbers.
Well, Randall, you've given us a lot to work with there, and thank you so much for coming and sharing your insight.
Thank you for having me.
That's all from myself and Randall today in the Geneva studio. But if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and comment on dukascopy.tv.